Well, welcome back, everybody, to yet another attempt to distinguish good from bad science. Today's topic is that the American Medical Association is a menace. The AMA, as it goes by, naturally weighed in, if you recall, at the end of Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court's ruling. The AMA itself said it was deeply disturbed by the court's ruling. They used these odd terms. Let's look at these odd terms that they use. Quote, patients' rights to critical reproductive health care, end quote. Quote, evidence-based reproductive health services, end quote. And finally, quote, states that end legal abortion will not end abortion. They will end safe abortion. This is the leading medical association in the United States and perhaps the world. Now, killing the lives inside would-be mothers is not health care. In any way, it is by definition not reproductive health care, and there is no evidence on earth that says so. Whatever the killing is, whether or not you agree with it, it is the opposite of reproductive. That it is a medical, and that's a medical, that's not a legal or moral judgment. That's just pure biology, meaning we're dealing with a medical organization that does not understand its very foundational topic. Now, here's an equivalent to their final argument. Let's recall their final argument. States that end legal abortion will not end abortion. They will end safe abortion. Now, we've all heard variants like that before, but let's think about that in terms of an equivalent argument. States that end legal murder will not end murder. They will end safe murder, which is true, but ridiculous, as is their argument about safe abortion. If it's outlawed, you're not supposed to have them. And so getting a safe one is immaterial. Now, we're not gonna. I'm not gonna argue abortion in this particular podcast here, except to note that the AMA is wading in on areas that doctors often weigh in on subjects that they know no more about than anybody else, which is the morality of abortion. Now, here also the AMA, just to broaden their scope, they also noted its deep disappointment with the Supreme Court's, quote, harmful and disturbing decision on gun rights. This was also earlier in the year. They say that gun violence, their term, is a, quote, public health crisis, which it is not. Murder and mayhem are crises, certainly, but these have to do with people committing the violence and not the tools they use to carry out their brutalities. And we can prove that with ease. For the AMA never ever argues that government employees should surrender their weapons, which are much more dangerous weapons than possessed by the public. So it's not the public carrying weapons that are the problem. It's people, and as we all know. Now, we earlier met the CEO of the AMA, James Madara, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and his startling endorsement of slicing the healthy parts off of children, live children, not dead ones, so that people will think he, Madara, is a good person. I have a link at the blog to a post we did earlier in this year. Madara said laws to stop the mutilations are, quote, now, let me just get this straight, make sure you heard that. He said the laws to stop the mutilations are, quote, a dangerous government intrusion into the practice of medicine, end quote. Yes, he really did say cutting up children is medicine, which reminds us that it is scientism, with everything we've seen so far, it is scientism to say doctors know what is best for their patients. They do not necessarily. They might happen to, but that doesn't mean they do every time and necessarily. They must only be consulted for what treatment is recommended after the patient has decided what outcome is best. The patient decides, not the doctor. Doctors have no special insight into right and wrong, especially in a culture which emphasizes wrong. Doubtless, though, Madara, however he pronounces it, is right in his opinion Experts, reporters, celebrities, academics, and rulers will think he is a good person for encouraging doctors to mutilate the healthy children under their care. Indeed, we can well predict that he is likely to win awards for his position. Ordinary people, however, those still in touch with reality, capital R, reality, understand that Madara is a corrupt, soul-blackened, atrocious, demonic monster who, if there was any justice in our collapsing regime, would receive the same treatment he advocates for children, but without anesthetic. The AMA, an organization of people whose only claim to authority is that they've memorized the names of all the bones, also demands that sex be removed from birth certificates. Here's a quote. Requiring the sex on birth certificates, requiring it can lead to discrimination, a word which we learned about yesterday. Back to the quote. Requiring it could lead to discrimination and unnecessary burden on individuals whose current gender identity does not align with their designation at birth, namely when they register for school or sports, adopt, or get married, or request personal records. This position, end quote, this position, scientifically described, is insane. It is not sane. It is not in accord with reality. It is at variance with the way the universe is. It makes no sense. Added to this cruelty and insanity is idiocy, because the AMA has also declared, and I have links to all these stories, climate change, so-called climate change, is a, quote, public health crisis. Now, one glance out your weather window is sufficient to disprove there's a crisis, an asinine hyperbole used only to propagandize. The idiocy comes in statements like the one made by someone named Ilsa Levin, an American Medical Association board member. She said, quote, "The scientific evidence is clear. Our patients, she said, are already facing adverse health effects associated with climate change. From heat-related injuries, vector-borne diseases, and air pollution from wildfires, to worsening seasonal allergies and storm-related illnesses and injuries." Well, that's the end quote. The scientific evidence is clear, and it is that patients are not suffering adverse health effects from so-called climate change. So what Levin said is false. It is not true. It is at variance with reality, as we said. It is not so. It is an untruth. There are umpteen times 10 demonstrations using the government's own evidence that the weather is not growing worse, and that weather-related injuries and the like are growing better, and so on and so on. I have a whole bunch of links to these kinds of things. You can look it all up. The trends are all down, and not just down a little, but down by a lot. Death tolls from floods are down. Hurricanes are down. Everything is down. So she's lying. Well, maybe she's not lying. Let me just let me be clear about this in a moment. Let's just talk about a couple of these things. For instance, wildfires. She mentioned pollution, air pollution from wildfires. So let me attack one of those. In my own paper on how attribution studies are far, far too certain and must not be trusted or used to make any policy decisions, I say this. I'm going to quote myself. Wildfires are a good example of these climate attribution studies. The press often touts increases. Yet the National Interagency Fire Center, the preeminent authority supposedly, which maintains a database of wildfires, says, quote, "People should not put any stock in numbers prior to 1960, and that comparing the modern fire area to earlier estimates is not accurate or appropriate." For the very obvious reason that measurements are much better now than they used to be before, especially with the advent of satellite. We have standard observational bias going on here. How about heat-related injuries? Levin also quoted or mentioned heat-related injuries. Well, earlier this year, we looked at several papers, peer-reviewed papers, and seen every time claims like this are untrue, and based on poor statistics. In other words, Levin, the bone memorizer, knows not of what she speaks, which allows her to say things like this, quote, like the COVID-19 pandemic, the climate crisis will disproportionately impact the health of historically marginalized communities. Taking action now won't reverse all of the harm done, but it will help prevent further damage to our planet and our patients' health and well-being, end quote. How many times has anybody counted? Have we seen this world ends joke? It seems the only purpose women in historically marginalized communities have is to provide ready-made victims for experts in need of vice signaling opportunities. That's it. I mean, there's much more. We can go much more into the statements the AMA made, but I hope I've shown you, or at least given you a good hint that they are a menace and must be stopped. Thanks very much for listening.
Oh, Doctor. Doctor. Look, Doctor, I'm here.
Never mind. Just come right in and take your shirt off.
Wait a minute. There's something I didn't settle with the nurse. What do you charge for an examination?
Nothing. Now take your shirt off.
Wait a minute. If you don't charge people, how do you make a living?
I keep their shirts.
Oh.
Now let's get on with the examination.